Good luck. Find a better deal in this economy, the vice president said, laughing so loudly that the sound reverberated off the cold glass walls of the conference room. His name was Mark. I can still see the smug smile on his face. His colleagues looked at each other and smirked, as if I were a joke they had heard many times before. My only fault was that I knew my worth, and I had the courage to say no to their humiliating offer. Have you ever had that moment when, in a room full of people, you feel your voice getting quieter, your value being questioned, and a quiet fire lights up inside? If you're listening to me now, maybe in the car or during lunch, write one. Where are you from? What city or country? I want to know how far this story goes and if you recognize anything in it. My name is Amelia Hansen. I've been a data architect for 8 years, bringing order to the chaos of global logistics where others saw only noise. For the past 3 years, I'd spent nights and weekends creating something new, a model I called Ariadne. It was more than an algorithm. It was a vision of the ability to anticipate supply chain failures and prevent them. It was my life's work, my intellectual property, born at the cost of missed holidays and sleepless nights. It was because of this that I found myself in a conference room on the top floor of Cape Dynamics. After weeks of complex reviews, I waited for a formal proposal. I showed them everything: the elegant architecture, the perfect simulation results, the enormous financial impact. The data was impeccable proof. And then Mark, the VP of operations, handed me a single sheet of paper. The number on it wasn't just small, it was an insult. It was a salary for a subordinate, not for the creator of a system that could change his entire department. I inhaled slowly. The air in the room was heavy and still. Mark, I said in an even voice, I appreciate the offer, but that amount doesn't reflect the value I bring to your company and the expertise it requires. At that moment, he leaned back in his expensive leather chair and laughed loudly. It wasn't laughter, but a weapon, a way to show that I was inferior. I felt my neck heat up, but my hands remained calm. I looked him straight in the eyes, stood up, and smoothed my dress. Thank you for your time. Walking out of that room was the longest walk of my life. The heavy glass door closed behind me with a dull click, leaving their laughter behind. The drive home through Austin traffic passed in a fog. The sounds of the city seemed to disappear in my ears. Only his laughter sounded. For a moment, his mockery became the voice of my own fears. I wondered if I had been too self-confident. Maybe I had overdone it. After all, the market was shrinking. Opportunities like this were few, and I had rent, student debt, ambitions that weighed heavily on me, as if I'd just ruined my only chance. But when I got home, looking out the window at the city's evening glow, I felt something different. The doubts were gone. In their place was a firm confidence. I wasn't arrogant. I was right. My models weren't lying. Years of sacrifice weren't lies. They looked at the revolution and saw only an expense item in the budget. They didn't just underestimate my price. They completely misunderstood my value, and that would be their mistake. I didn't wait for them to realize it. For 3 days, I worked like a machine, polished my portfolio, sent out the right messages through my network, and scheduled 2 interviews at major IT companies. There was no time for anger or resentment. There was only the cold focus of a professional seeking a new opportunity. Logisayor became just a mistake in my data for me. I was just texting the recruiter when my phone vibrated from an unknown number. I usually ignored such calls, but something told me I need to pick up the phone. "This is Amelia," I answered in a calm voice. There was a brief silence on the line and the low hum of office sounds. Then a deep, controlled voice rang out, a hint of alarm in it. "Miss Jensen, this is Arthur Sterling, CEO of Logisayor Dynamics." I immediately sat up straight, my hand frozen on the mouse. I had never spoken to him before, or even seen him. I remained silent, letting the weight of his position hang in the air, forcing him to continue. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I'm calling because we have a serious problem. Our largest client, Urcorp, is threatening to cancel a $200 million contract immediately. Their entire global logistics are in chaos because our prediction models have completely failed in the last 48 hours. An entire fleet of cargo ships is heading to the wrong continent. We're flying blind, Ms. Jensen. He paused, and I heard the genuine stress pierce his voice for a second. My engineers are working nonstop. They're confident. Only your system can fix this, he said. I held the phone to my ear, the cold glass pressed against my skin, and remained silent. This pause was no longer awkward. It was my weapon. In this silence, I was no longer the rejected candidate. I was the only person with a solution to a $200 million crisis. I let the silence work. Let him feel it for himself. Their entire organization, with all the confident vice presidents, has failed. And now they need me. Ms. Jensen, you're on the line. His voice grew tense. The calm began to crumble. I'm here, Mr. Sterling. I answered calmly, like smooth water. Just thinking about your words. You are in a difficult situation. A situation that could have been prevented. I let those words sink in. He needed to understand that this was not a negotiation on equal terms. This was a rescue operation. And I set the conditions. I am aware of the circumstances, he said sharply. What would it take for you to join? Name a price. I knew it wasn't just about money. My price, Mr. Sterling, isn't a single number. It's 4 conditions, and all of them are mandatory. I heard his leather chair creak, as if he were squirming under the pressure. I am listening. First, we'll discuss compensation. The first offer was a mistake. My actual level, given my expertise in your crisis, is 30% higher than that amount, plus a one-time bonus equal to a year's salary. This will compensate for initially underestimating me. There was a silence on the other end, filled with calculations. I gave him a second and continued without changing my tone. Second, I need complete authority over the data architecture and all related projects. My title is Director of Data Strategy. I will report directly to you. No intermediaries. Your current failure is the result of interference and a lack of technical understanding at the management level. To fix this, I must be protected from the same conditions that created it. I let him digest the direct challenge and immediately moved on. Third, power without tools is useless. I will assemble the team myself. I will have the budget to hire new specialists from outside. And no less important is the right to redeploy current employees if they don't fit the project's new direction. I need a team of specialists, not politicians, I said, pausing. The first 3 conditions had already been voiced, but the fourth and last one was the most difficult. It didn't cost money, but the company's culture itself. And the last thing, Mr. Sterling, my voice became lower and more precise. This is a systemic condition. A new protocol will be implemented in Vlagi Sayor. I have developed a system of complete transparency. Every important piece of code, every architectural decision will be recorded, noted by the author, and its effect will be tracked automatically. This is not about praise or punishment. This is a security protocol. It ensures that competence is rewarded and that disasters due to irresponsibility and dishonesty never happen again. There was silence on the line for a full 10 seconds. I knew it was a cultural bomb. She was destroying the old system where managers could take credit for the team's achievements and mediocrity hid behind titles. It was a direct blow to everything that Mark's success rested on. Finally, he spoke. There was no longer any tension in the voice, only the cold determination of a man who had made a choice. The cost of failure is higher than the cost of implementation. The conditions are unusual, Miss Jensen, but the situation is exceptional. You have a deal. All 4 conditions. Have your lawyer contact our legal department. We need you to start on Monday. Monday arrived not with a sense of victory, but with the cold focus of a strategist on the first day of a campaign. I entered the shining hall of Legizier Dynamics the same way I had once entered as a candidate. But the air was different. Now I was immediately shown to my office, a spacious office with a panoramic view of Austin. The view was the same as from the conference room, where I was once humiliated. In my briefcase was my contract with 4 conditions, now officially established. It was a new constitution for a small but strong part of the company. I spent the first hour alone figuring out their system. Data flows were chaos, errors, panicked manual edits. It looked like a digital crime scene. Traces of incompetence were everywhere. At 3:10 p.m., a notification appeared on the screen. mandatory meeting in the conference room and the war room. The time has come. When I walked in, the half-dozen engineers and analysts fell silent. Their gazes were a mixture of curiosity and anxiety. Mark stood at the head of the table, impeccably dressed, his smile even and polite, but his eyes cold as pieces of ice. "Amelia," he said, holding out his hand. "Welcome to the team. We are all looking forward to your views on the latest challenges." The handshake was firm, short, and completely insincere. Then he pointed to another man. "This is David Chun, our head of IT." David was the complete opposite of Mark, quiet, observant, with the confidence of a man who knows his business. He nodded slightly. I remember this moment. Mark started the meeting with a presentation full of corporate buzzwords. Unexpected market fluctuations, outdated systems, external constraints. All this was an attempt to present the catastrophic failure as something inevitable, as a force of nature. The engineers in the room felt uneasy. When he finished, Mark turned to me with a tight smile. "So, Amelia, what are your first thoughts?" I didn't answer directly. Instead, she said, "David, give me presenter rights to the main screen." The screen flashed and my interface appeared. No slides. I have output raw system logs for the last 48 hours. Line by line code and errors. Silent and obvious evidence. "The problem isn't market fluctuations," I said calmly, confidently. I showed the cursors the repeating chain of failures. The problem was in the core sorting algorithm. It was creating a recursive loop that, under load, didn't just break, but began feeding corrupted data back into the network. This wasn't an external attack. This was a systemic error waiting to happen. The room fell silent. The engineers leaned forward, illuminated by the screen's light, and understanding was dawning in their eyes. And then I saw it. A subtle movement. Mark looked away from the screen for a second and shot a quick, cold glance at David. And David narrowed his eyes and nodded almost imperceptibly. It wasn't agreement. It was confirmation. Their shared legend had just collapsed before everyone's eyes. And I realized my enemy wasn't just one person. It was an alliance, deeply entrenched and controlling the flow of information. The problem with Legizier wasn't just an algorithm. The problem was political. I uncovered the first symptom. This quiet sign wasn't a declaration of war. It was the activation of a hidden immune system designed to rid itself of a foreign cell like me. And the very next morning, I felt it at work. I arrived early to begin transferring data to the Ariadna system. But when I tried to log into the main logistics server, the screen flashed access denied. I immediately dialed David's office. He answered with a voice laced with practiced regret. "Oh, Amelia, last night we implemented a new security protocol across the entire network. It was a pre-planned update. You need to fill out Form SR-47 and have it signed by operations." The perfect trap. Mark's signature must be on the form. Complaining to the CEO on the second day about the security protocol would look weak. "Understood," I said after the call. I opened the encrypted document and named it Chronology. She wrote down the date, time, description of the incident, and David's dry explanation. They chose plausible deniability as their weapon. My weapon will be facts. The second attack came 2 days later. My project needed powerful servers. The equipment was approved, but the order status was changed. Frozen, waiting for budget review in the operations department. Another blow. I took a screenshot, added it to the timeline, and wrote a short, objective description. Mark took the third step. He scheduled an important meeting with leading engineers. I was not invited. I found out by chance when a young engineer hesitantly asked about the new, impossible deadline set at that meeting. I checked my calendar. It was at this time that Mark signed me up for a mandatory onboarding meeting with HR. A perfectly thought-out exception. In the evening, I understood their plan. They had no intention of firing me. They wanted me to fail. They had a plan to deprive the project of resources, block access, cut off information, and tie me up in bureaucracy. And then, when the deadlines are missed, Mark will bring sterling evidence of my incompetence. It was a slow, methodical killing through a paper system, but they had one mistake. They forgot that a company is a living organism. It contains stories, old grudges and loyalties that are not found in any org chart. For 2 days, I studied not supply chains, but careers. I leafed through project archives and reports, looking for one special pattern. A talented engineer whose ideas were suddenly silenced a few years ago, just when Mark rose to vice president. That's how I connected with Ben Carter, a senior programmer and one of the company's first employees. There were 3 months left until retirement. His early work was legendary, but the last 4 years have seen him reduced to petty routine. I realized that I needed to approach him with caution. I found it in the company's almost abandoned library. The brand and sabotage were not mentioned. She simply introduced herself and described a complex technical challenge: how to access old data streams without affecting modern monitoring systems. I presented this as a purely theoretical puzzle. He listened attentively, and suddenly a slow, understanding smile appeared on his face. "He blocked your access." "Yes," Ben said in a low, booming voice. David was always good at building walls, but he never knew how to build bridges. He admitted that many years ago, he created a powerful diagnostic system called Cassandra. This system could have predicted the failure of AOP, but Mark shut down the project, calling it an unnecessary expense. For Ben, my problem became a chance to prove that he was right. He stood up and gestured for me to follow him into the depths of the building. We found ourselves in a cold server room full of humming machines I'd never heard of. In a dusty corner stood a sturdy row of old, unmarked servers. "This is the company's old data core," Ben explained. When David built his new network, he moved everything there, but he didn't turn off this node, just cut it off from the main interface. He showed me the hidden port, but the system still receives a mirror copy of all the data. It's like a ghost. It sees everything, but no one thinks to look here. Ben handed me a small drive. "With this, you will have secure access, untraceable. You will be able to see all the company's data in real time. Let them build walls as much as they want. You can walk through them from here." I took the device. The cage they built for me now had a secret door. From the quiet refuge of the old node, I saw everything. The stream of panicked internal messages, the reports Mark sent beautifully to management, and David's security checks on the fortress I had already bypassed. But simply exposing them would be a dirty political battle. It was necessary not only to show their past mistakes, it was necessary to create a new event, obvious and irrefutable. My game began in the corridors. I feigned polite irritation, as if a tired employee, and in the Go system, I was preparing bait. I took a version of my Ariadne algorithm and deliberately ruined it. It was elegant sabotage. In tests on small data, the algorithm worked perfectly, but it had one fatal flaw hidden within. When connected to the company's real flows, it collapsed and produced chaotic gibberish. A beautiful Trojan horse, shiny on the outside, self-destructing on the inside. I placed this masterpiece on the development server in a folder called Adney Optimized Final Build. It was like leaving a diamond on a pedestal in a room where there were definitely observers. I waited 3 days. Silence. On the 4th day, what happened was exactly what was needed. Through Ghost Access, I saw that David's account had been granted high-level administrative access. Ariadne's entire optimized final build folder was copied to Mark's personal directory. They took the bait. The next morning, the trap was fully sprung. From the office, Mark received an urgent meeting invitation for all management and Arthur Sterling. The topic was a breakthrough solution for the AOC project. I looked at the invitation calmly, almost with satisfaction. Everything was like clockwork. All the gears had finally clicked into place. Mark walked into the room, thinking he was going to show off his great success. And I knew he was going to admit his guilt. I entered the conference room 5 minutes after it started. The air was tense. Arthur Sterling sat at the head of a long table, his face impassive. Mark stood at the podium, basking in the attention. He nodded to me with a victorious air when I sat against the wall. He spoke beautifully and confidently about a new generation of solutions, about how he and his team took my unfinished model and turned it into a finished product. Then he launched a simulation using the stolen code. Elegant graphs appeared on the screen. Forecast accuracy had increased dramatically. The board of directors hummed with approval. Mark smiled triumphantly. But a few seconds later, as the system began to receive more live data, the graphs appeared the first tremor. Lines that should have been smooth began to twitch, break, and soon devolved into a chaotic storm of errors. Silence fell over the room. Mark's smile faltered. Just a minor data cache error, he said too loudly. The logic of the algorithm is in order. In order? Arthur Sterling asked quietly but firmly. His gaze passed Mark and stopped on me. Miss Jensen, your opinion. I calmly stood up and connected my device. Mark's presentation was really interesting, I said in an even voice. Especially because the algorithm he showed is actually mine. Only he showed it in a distorted form. A murmur ran through the room. I turned on split screen. On the left is a faulty model of the brand. On the right is the real Ariadne. The same data flow went to both systems. Mark's model was collapsing, but my version was showing clear and accurate predictions. The contrast was complete. The version Mark used was a deliberately corrupted Trojan, I explained calmly. It was always supposed to break under real stress. Without giving anyone a chance to interrupt, I opened the last screen of the Ghost System Access log. And here's the line I highlighted for the cursors. A record of that very copy. A high-level login under David Chen's account. 4 days ago, at 2:17 a.m., he copied Ariadne's optimized final build folder from my server to Mark's personal directory. Absolute silence fell. A heavy silence hung in the room. The silence of an exposed conspiracy. I watched Mark's face turn pale, his expression changing. The confidence of arrogance vanished. Only horror and shock remained. He had fallen into the trap he had helped create, and I had just presented the board of directors with all the evidence. The key, the motive, and the actual confession. For a minute, no one spoke. Only the hum of the air conditioner could be heard. Then Sterling spoke. His voice was cold as a knife. Mark, we will have a conversation with the general counsel and HR. Immediately. Wait for me with my assistant. Mark didn't object, just nodded, gathered his things with trembling hands, and left without even looking back. The door clicked, and a new chapter began. Sterling's gaze circled the room and stopped on me. The atmosphere had changed. This was no longer a trial, but a strategic meeting. It looks like we have a VP of operations position available, he said dryly. Ms. Jensen, the job is yours. If you like, you will have full authority. It was a victory, but I felt only the weight of future decisions. Thank you, Mr. Sterling, I replied calmly. But one title is not enough. The problem was not just one person. The problem was a system where there was no control and accountability. I looked him straight in the eyes. If I agree, it will only be on one condition: a full mandate and a budget to implement the transparency protocol I spoke of, not just for my team, but for the entire company. We will create a culture where value is determined by data, not politics. This is my price for fixing not just the project, but your company. Sterling looked at me for a long moment, appraisingly. Respect flashed in his eyes. You've exposed more than just a bad manager, Amelia. For the first time, he called me by name. You've exposed the rot at the very foundation. He nodded decisively. You have the mandate. Fix the system. 6 months later, I was sitting in Mark's office. It was now my office. The view of the Austin skyline remained the same, but the company behind the glass had changed. The silence on the floors was no longer tense, but focused and productive. The Ariadne Protocol, a system of transparency, was implemented company-wide, and it worked better than I could have dreamed. We not only saved the contract with Razapy, but also signed an even bigger one with their main competitor. A notification from an industry forum appeared on the screen. It mentioned that a new consulting firm, opened by 2 former Topals, Jakar Mark and David, it closed after 4 months. No scandal, no big news. Just the quiet death sentence of the market. Whispers about unreliable partners. Reputational death, when a network decides you no longer matter. I read the post and felt nothing. No joy, no satisfaction. Their end was simply the logical result of the equations they wrote for themselves. I closed the notification and returned to work. The complex and beautiful task of building a system that works and is fair. The laughter that once rang in that boardroom seemed like an echo from another life. The real victory wasn't over them. The real victory is a new system in which value can never again be so catastrophically distorted.